Back. Hopefully, it's a welcome back anyway. This is and good afternoon, good evening. Um, I am Kezadrith, and I'm once again going to be talking about the Hero System tabletop RPG. This is not a game per se. I'm not trying to stream my game, though do have one running. And in fact, these streams started out as me trying to get my players for that game, a fantasy type setting, back in the swing of doing Hero System. But they've led to so much more. So I'm nowadays talking about the rules and some of the aspects of the game, trying to maybe get some of you more interested in playing the game and getting into the tabletop version of Hero System, also known as Champions. The two terms are used even by me interchangeably. A lot of us got introduced to it under the Champions, but Champions usually refers to the superhero aspects of the game. That said, I use 5th edition rules. There is a more current edition out there, 6th edition. There are some, as I understand it, significant rule changes. The reason I have not updated to 6th edition myself has more to do with the fact that I am an older player and am sort of stuck in my ways. I have never had any issues with what 5th edition allows me to do or not to do. And when you add in that and the fact that I just don't have the time or ability to play as much as I did when I was in my teens and 20s, it's kind of a situation of I don't have the funds to shell out to buy yet another edition. Sorry, Hero. I will still pump your system and will encourage people to check it out and check into it. But as for myself, I'm going to continue using 5th edition, and so it is 5th edition rules, the 5th edition rule set that I will be discussing. The other thing I do use is as you see up on the screen before you, is the Hero Designer 6 software. A lot of the complaints about Hero System are the character building, because it is a point-buy system, and there is a considerable amount of math involved. And Hero Designer 6 allows you to design and build your characters without the pain of a lot of that math being in the forefront. A lot of it can be pushed to the back. Though, if you are interested in the math and the basic ideas and rules of the game, I do have a few videos up on my YouTube, which is at YouTube Kezadrith. I use the same name there. And there are a few videos up that get into some of the math and the building of characters and things like that, the basics. So with that in mind, if you really are interested, I recommend going back and looking me up on YouTube and looking at some of those other videos. That said, we're going to jump in. As I've said before, or as my title for this video says, this stream, I'm looking at some of the stop sign advantages on this one. In a previous one, went over all these stop sign powers. Why do they have stop signs? Because the stop signs represent powers that can very seriously throw your game out of balance. They have the potential to be seriously misused, and that's not necessarily even an intentional thing. They just have that ability that if they are used and even used in the way they were intended, you can wind up with something you really weren't anticipating in your game. This goes for both players and GMs. They're just things you need to watch. The yield signs are other powers and advantages and limitations that you also need to be watched, but they are not quite as potentially game breaking as the stop signs are. So that said, I've already started in and discussing some of the stop sign advantages, But let's go into some of the others. So let's kick this up to an 8-6 Energy Blast. Energy Blast being the basic attack power, normal attack power in the system. There are other types of attacks and so forth, but the ones that deal direct damage to a target are Energy Blast and the two types of killing attacks, hand killing attacks and ranged killing attacks. I'm going to do most of my examples with straight up Energy Blast. So I've gotten my 8d6 Energy Blast. It has a active cost of 40 active points right now, which active points give you a gauge on how effective a power is, gives you a means of comparing powers. It is the total of the base cost plus a cost for any added advantages on the power. Advantages are a type of modifier. The other type of modifier are limitations, and limitations reduce the cost that the player or the character is charged for getting that power, and that is reflected in the real cost. Right now, I have no advantages and no limitations on this power 8-6 Energy Blast, so the real cost is the same as the active points. So now we'll call up the modifiers, and we see a whole bunch of stop signs and yellow yield signs that are all these advantages that you should be watching. And I hope my stream is coming through clear. If not, I apologize. My upload speed is not that great at the moment. So I'll try not to do anything too rapid. All right. The last time I was working on this, I really talked about megascale and usable on others or by others or against others. I think I mentioned double knockback. I'm going to start with it though, because I think I might have missed a few points about double knockback. First off, double in the rule set, knockback is the ability of the power. You've been knocked back. You've been hit by an attack power, and it blows you back, like you see all the times in the comic books and in movies based off of the comic books. You get slammed by it, and boom, you go flying backwards. Double knockback. Well, let's talk about how knockback is calculated first. To get knockback, the amount of knockback that is done, you count up the body of the body damage that was done by the attack. In the case of a normal attack, that's a complicated thing. The total of the dice is the amount of stun it's done. The body that is done, ones rolled count for no body damage done. 2 through 5 mean 1 body damage done, and each 6 does 2 body damage. So on average, an 8-6 Energy Blast, a normal attack like this, is going to do 8 body damage. It's going to do much more stun. So that's how that works. So to figure knockback, you take the body damage that was done by the attack. You subtract any damage that was taken up punching through any walls or barriers. Okay, so you subtract that out. Then you subtract the total of 2d6 dice rolled, and then finally any knockback resistance the character may have. So double knockback, what it does, and it can be bought as either double knockback or 1.5 knockback, but double knockback, what it does is it doubles that body damage done. Now, it doesn't double it for the amount of damage done, but it doubles it for the purposes of determining knockback. So let's say this 8-6 Energy Blast did its average 8 body damage. Now, the target gets their PD or ED, depending on whether it's a physical attack or it's stated as a physical energy blast, or sounds funny saying that, or an energy blast. But it does an 8-6 body. The player gets to subtract their defenses against that, which may mean nobody gets through, but we still have to calculate knockback from the 8 body that it potentially did. All right. So here we go. If you put double knockback on it, that doubles in calculating the knockback the 8 body done to 16 body. All right. So bottom line is, if we had not put double knockback on it, it could do as little as 2 inches of knockback. Now that's game inches, which the game is usually done with a hexagonal grid, with the hexagons being 1 inch on a face, so a 1 inch diameter hexagon. So a game inch is actually 2 meters of space. So without the double knockback on it, this attack would normally do between 2 and 6 game inches of knockback. All right. By putting double knockback on it, the only and assuming no knockback resistance on the part of the target, it now does between let's see, 8 doubled is 16, so minus 12, 6. Okay, so it could do no knockback with the regular, but it's going to do between sorry, I'm trying to do math in my head. 16 minus 12 is 4, and 16 inches of knockback. Whereas the previous one could potentially do no knockback without this advantage on there. The reason that's important and a big deal is because basically the knockback does damage too. If you are knocked back into a wall, you take the inches of knockback in damage. So this 8 die 6 attack has the potential to do 16 die 6 in potential knockback damage. So that's why this has a stop sign on it. It makes sense for some powers to have that, but it's something you need to be aware, because the potential for the amount of knockback damage, that far outstrips what the damage of the attack itself can do. So it's something that needs to be watched. It's something you need to keep in mind. So just because a player can justify it, just because it may be there, there may be a valid reason for it to be there, does not mean you necessarily need to allow it. Because if nothing else, even if it doesn't do that much damage, knockback means the target was knocked back and is prone. So their DCV is limited. They have to spend a half phase action, a half of their action, to get back to their feet, and such as that. The effects of the double knockback are significant. And even though it's a plus 3/4 advantage, so a fairly stout advantage, it's just watch what you're doing with it. Watch what you allow with that advantage. So that's double knockback. That's mega scale. We've talked about usable by others or for others. Transdimensional. Basically, this is a power that can affect another dimension. To be honest, I've never run into any potential use for that. It could be devastating in that if you also put indirect on it, you could put it on an attack power. You could attack into another dimension. But if you don't have any means of perceiving into that dimension, you're potentially attacking blind, plus potential range penalties. So to me, I'm not really going to discuss much about transdimensional, simply because I've never encountered a situation where it could break the game. Obviously, the fact that the stop sign is there doesn't mean that it can't. In fact, it means there's a pretty good chance that it can. It just means I haven't thought up how it could break the game. So we're going to leave it at that. And so we're going to go to our next one, which is variable advantage. Now, variable advantage is really a pretty stout advantage. What it allows you to do is it allows you from one attack to the next to pick a certain amount of any of these advantages to put on the power. Okay? So the minimum it should be is probably plus 1/2 because most of these advantages are plus 1/2 advantages. And if you notice, the value of the advantage is double whatever you put in as the variable amount is. So if you want half an advantage, plus 1/2 advantage worth of advantages to put on this energy blast, you must pay as if it was a plus 1 advantage. Well, why does it cost so much, and what's the big deal about being able to advantage it? Well, the reason you might want to is just because it allows you to portray a large variety of powers without necessarily buying each one individually. So let's say you have a blaster, nice weapon, that can be switched to auto fire, where it fires off 5 shots in one attack, or it can be set on armor piercing, or it can be set on explosion. All of these are plus 1/2 advantages. Well, normally you'd have to buy 3 attacks, but with variable advantage, you can lower your number of dice and have all 3 of those in one power being bought. So there is reason to do variable advantage. But there's how it breaks the game as well. Is bottom line, you can put any of these advantages up to the plus 1/2 on this. So if you really wanted to do something really crazy, you could put plus 1 on it, and now you could have an area effect. All right, other than area effect 1/2, 1 hex. So the rule really should be, and the reason the stop sign is there, has more to do with the fact that if you allow too much variable advantage, they could put, say, if they put plus 1.5, then you could do an auto fire area effect. Or even with plus 1, you can do auto fire area effect 1 hex. Why is that bad? We always have a joke. I don't have to hit you, I have to hit your hex. Because with an area effect even 1 hex, which is a plus 1/2 advantage, I don't have to hit you. I just have to hit the hex you're standing in, and your hex has a defensive combat value, a DCV, of 3. So let's say you were a martial artist jumping all over the place, dodging everything. You're Neo, and I can't hit you. If I can slap an area effect 1 hex on there, I don't have to hit you. I just have to hit your hex. And its DCV is 3 rather than the 11 that you have. All right? So that can be a considerable shift in the power and the ability of the power. So it's something you have to watch out for. Now, one of the drawbacks, one of the issues with variable advantages, I, as the player or the user of this power, must always have plus 1/2 of advantages on the power. Now, generally speaking, this isn't a big issue. Like I said, I can make it area effect 1 hex. I can make it armor piercing. I can make it auto fire. I could make it an explosion. I could make it some types of indirect, and so forth. So basically, keeping that plus 1/2 worth of advantage on it is no big deal. So let's take a look at what that does. And this is now an 80 active point power. And without any limitations on it, it's going to be 80 real points for me too. Now, this is important because I personally would not allow this power in my game because I have a limit on powers of 90 active points. So this falls under that, but I also have a limit of 60 active points, not 60 active points, but 12 damage classes on starting powers, and this would exceed that because, oh, hey, Wondergoon, variable advantage is definitely an advantage that affects how the damage from this attack can be applied or is applied because it can be armor piercing or penetrating. And so this would break the 12 damage class limit, so you'd have to make it 6d6. So that again is a limit on just how effective, but it is still worthy of its stop sign on variable advantage. It is simply, it's nice. It allows you types of attacks because again, you can put any plus 1/2 advantage on it. But in the end, it is something a game master should watch. You absolutely should keep an eye out on it. So that's variable advantage. Now, there's one more stop sign power advantage that is not on this list because first you've got to make it area of effect. And so I'm going to make it area of effect radius. So now it affects an area, a radius of a certain radius. And now we see it pop up, mobile. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say you also have to have this advantage continuous on it before mobile really becomes an issue. What area effect radius does, let's go ahead and take a look at it, is it makes this 6x6 energy blast affect a 6-inch radius. So 6 game inch radius circle is now affected by this power. Okay? That's pretty big area. You're going to hit a lot of people, a lot of targets in that. Continuous means I don't have to keep making an attack roll. I make the first attack roll to lay it down. Now it's there until I decide it's not. I can just choose to keep it going. Okay? So now, here comes where mobile is a stop sign. Because if I put mobile on it, and we can also already see what the active points on this power are now. And Wondergoon and I both are going, no. What mobile does is you can now move the area that this is affecting. So this 6-inch globe, so 12-meter radius globe, is now able to be moved around at 12 meters per your action. And as Wondergoon has so pleasantly pointed out, not in my campaign, buddy, exactly. Well, okay, so what if we just lower the dice on it? We'll get in at your 12 damage classes. It's only 3d6. Yes, it's 3d6 to everyone in that area all the time, every time, until you decide to not do it anymore. All right? Now, mobile without the continuous isn't that bad because a non-continuous power goes out there, flashes, and it's over. So what good did it do that it was mobile? The answer is not much. So there we go. But this is why mobile has a stop sign out beside it, is because it allows you to move this area effect attack around the board. And that leads to all sorts of problems. Now, that takes us through all of the stop sign advantages that I've covered either in this stream or in my previous one. So I'm going to get into something here before starting in on the yield sign powers and advantages and limitations, because I don't believe there are any stop sign limitations, and there are not. Oh, actually, there's one more I've got to cover, and that's uncontrolled. So let's do that real quick. All right. So let me take off these three off of this guy and then bring it back up. And let's look at uncontrolled. Oh, uncontrolled, first off, must be on a continuous power. So in the case of an energy blast, it already must be continuous. So it's fire and forget. Or not fire and forget, but it's fire and I keep it on until I say it's off. Okay? What uncontrolled allows you to do, and let's bring up the definition, a constant power with this advantage can maintain itself without conscious thought from the user. So slapping uncontrolled on there makes it where I can fire it. I have to set up a pool of endurance, of my endurance points that it draws from, and now I can forget about it. It will now stay on that target, doing its damage until it runs out of endurance from that pool. All right? So already we should see several ways that this can be nasty. As I just described it, it's not that bad. Especially considering it is a +1/2 advantage, but on most attack powers, it's going to require a +1 advantage to be put on it. All right. So far, it doesn't seem that bad. But let's do this. And this gets into what my next topic is going to be about. And so it's a good heads up. Let's put 0 endurance on this attack power now. Not half endurance, 0 endurance. So now I attack someone with it, set it up with an endurance pool of 1, and basically it keeps hitting them until I decide to turn it off or they're burned down. That is the problem with uncontrolled. If the power that is uncontrolled costs 0 endurance, you should probably say no. Other combinations of abilities that can unbalance this is let's put sticky on it. Okay, sticky means that anybody that comes in contact with the target is now affected by the power too. So this uncontrolled 0 endurance sticky, like say I lit them on fire, which is why I use the expression burn them down. They are now on fire until they're burned down. And anybody that comes up and touches them trying to put them out is now on fire too. Okay? Now there is one drawback that's still in place. Uncontrolled must have one set of suitably, obviously common things that can put it out. So like for the fire attack I mentioned, it could be that you could douse them with water or throw sand on them. So these are obvious things you can do with a fire attack that will put them out and everything's okay. So uncontrolled does come with that extension, but I think you should be getting an idea of why this has a stop sign outside it. Yes, you have to set up an endurance pool. Yes, that has to come from you and your available powers. But until it's used up or until somebody does the stuff that obviously will put it out to stop it from working, this is an attack that you don't have to think about. You can go and make other attacks, and it's going to keep doing damage. So it's essentially now a free action. So what does Wonder Goon just said? Imagine this was a mind control. Controllable rage with the same advantages along the area effect, and even a low-powered super can take down 400-point heroes. He's exactly correct. You put this on mind control, you make it uncontrollable rage as the effect, and with these same advantages on it, people within the area are just beating the crap out of each other in an uncontrollable rage. it's not a good thing. It's something that must be watched. It is useful, it is appropriate in some circumstances, but it's something you must watch. Here's the other reason you must watch it. There is a power framework called a multi-power. Generally speaking, with a multi-power, when you switch uh, which power the multi-power is on, because there are slots inside the multi-power, and all of the powers derive their strength from the same pool of points, essentially, is what a multi-power is all about. Well, normally, if you have, say, an entangle power and you entangle somebody, if you change your multi-power off that, they're freed of the entangle. Okay? With this uncontrolled advantage, they're not. So one of the things that hinders the effectiveness of a multi-power is the fact that anything, if you change the slot that the multi-power is on, any power that was just used turns off. Okay? This is why it's not usually good to put flight in a multi-power. All right? But with uncontrolled, you set it up, you set up its power, its pool of endurance that it's drawing from, and now I can change my multi-power, and that person is still going to get hit by this power until it runs out of endurance. That is a very dangerous thing to allow into your campaign because, again, one of the hindering points to a multi-power is that they're all drawing for the same points, so any power that you shift to shuts off any use of one of the other slots, generally. There are exceptions to that, uncontrolled being one of them. So you need to seriously watch anything that has uncontrolled on it and keep these things in mind so that you don't end up with someone who's brought in something that is just horribly, horribly outside of what you ever intended. And that's the whole point of all of these stop signs. So that brings up the fact that even without a stop sign, I can make a completely ridiculous power. All right. I'm going to, without touching any of these, I'm going to make this power auto fire and explosion. Unless you are an artillery piece, this should never happen. Basically, auto fire, bringing up its definition. Oh, yeah, I've got to close that out. A character can use this power to hit a target more than once in a single phase. For each level of auto fire you bought, let's make it 5 shots. So for a plus 1.5 advantage, you now, for every activation of the power, you can shoot up to 5 shots. All right. How you determine this is by every 2 you make your attack roll by, you hit the target with another shot. All right. By putting explosion on it, you are now spreading out, targeting that one target with potentially 5 explosion rounds. Or if you track it and move it to hit multiple targets, you've got a string of 5 explosions going off. When you consider that explosion is an area of effect attack, it means that the DCV of your target is only 3. So you are going to probably hit with all 5. Not in my game. Okay, this is one combination of perfectly normal advantages that you will not get by me in my game. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. I don't know what else I could say. And not either of those 2 advantages are stop signs or yield signs even. So I'm going through this to point out to you that even if a set of advantages or a set of powers does not have a stop sign next to it, because even EB does not have a yield or stop sign, you've got to watch out sometimes for these types of combinations that just make things completely out of scale. Yes. Wondergoon points out that this, as it's statted, a 3-6 explosion auto fire attack, would be a great attack for taking down a large number of Viper agents. Viper is an organization within the Champions, the superheroic universe, that has a lot of agents and is trying to do world domination. These agents are typically just normal people with some good equipment. So a 3-6 explosion is going to do, potentially do, some damage to them. So a 3-6 explosion auto fire attack is probably going to be an agent clearer. Well, I put all those agents in there because, they can team up into 5 teams and take down stout superheroes with relatively limited ability powers that they have. So your ability to basically sweep the room just undid all of that. And this is why it should be watched. This is why, in short, I probably still wouldn't allow it. It'd be a good name for it, Room Sweeper. That's for dang sure. I mean, to technically stay within my guidelines, you could take it up to 4-6, and you'd still technically be within the allowable range of the house ruled limits. Yeah, Wondergoon said, I agree with you, by the way. This is not appropriate to the type of games I want to run. I want a large number of normal agents to be a problem for you and your superhero team. I don't want you to be able to room sweep them out of the way so you can get to the big boss. Are there people with powers like that in the comic books and in the source material? Absolutely. Doesn't mean I want one in my game. And that's why the GM should be and does have the authority to say, not in my game. All right. So that's all the stop signs. So I guess the next place is to get into some of these yield signs. These are powers and advantages and limitations that have the potential to unbalance things. They need to be watched. Okay? They're not as unbalancing potentially as the stop signs are, but you got to watch what's going on. So let's start with the powers, and then we'll work through advantages and then finally limitations. And so absorption. Absorption is a nice, wonderfully standard adjustment power. Basically, incoming damage of a specific type, energy or physical, is absorbed by the character. Now, the damage done is still done. Absorption offers no defense in and of itself. All right, that's something that a lot of people miss with this power. It is not going to block that damage despite its name. You still take the 6 body damage that it absorbs. You still take it. The problem is for every body damage that is of the appropriate type, energy or physical, you get 1 character point essentially to spend into absorbed points go into blah. The absorbed points go into can be anything from a characteristic to a power. I guess supposedly to a perk or talent, although most of those do not really lend themselves to being helped out by absorption. So the bottom line is you absorb some of the energy, but it does not offer you any defense, so you still take the damage, but you can apply it to your character points. Now, Well, I'll just apply it to my my damage. I took 6 body, so I will apply those 6 character points to body. Yeah, but body is 2 character points per point of body, so you took 6 to gain 3. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But where it usually comes in is absorb points go to strength. So you got hit with an attack that did 6 body to you, and you are now 6 points stronger. So, as Wonder points out, Sebastian Shaw, the Black King of the Hellfire Club from Marvel Comics, would have this power. He would absorb that attack, and some of the energy absorbed would go into his strength. You could channel those points into your energy blast and things like that. But there is a maximum of the total dice. So if we left it at 1d6, the maximum you could absorb would be 6 points. If you put it up to 2d6, the maximum you can absorb is 12. All right? So when you get hit by an appropriate attack, physical or energy, you throw the number of dice, and the body damage is the amount of body that you can absorb. All right? Those points are then put into whatever you have it going into. And this is where the abuse can come out, because I can increase that maximum by 2 points for 1 point. So I can make it where my maximum is now plus 30 points are 42 total points. And this power has a active point cost of 25 and a real cost of 25. Okay? So if I have it going into my strength, I can now get up to a 42 more points of strength rather easily. To put it in perspective, human normal maximum, the maximum physical performance a human can have is 20. So for each 5 points of strength, you are doubling the amount that you can lift and adding 1d6 to the damage. So if you started out with just normal human of 10 strength, this could lead to you having a 52 strength, and you're throwing around buses. And hence why it has a yield sign out beside it. It's something a GM wants to watch, because with very few points, a character can lead to something that has an attack far outside of what you initially thought were your limits. Let's say I didn't start with 10 strength, but instead started with, say, 30 strength. Then my strength is now 72 points when I max out my absorption. And so I've gone from 6x6 punch to a 14 die-6 point punch. That might be a problem for you as a GM. So watch this. Watch this in your own creations, because sometimes it's not just the players that can cause problems. Sometimes the GM can go do something that he ends up having to scratch his head and go, wow, that was a lot more effective than I thought it would be. So watch yourself for these types of things. Absorption is a perfectly good power. Nothing wrong with it. But watch it. Make sure it's not going to lead to something that's unbalanced or unbalancing. This is a great power for a villain, but be careful with it. Wondergoon is, again, 100% correct. Just watch it. It's not a bad power for a hero. Watch it. It can definitely lead to some scary things. Now, the limitation on this, the limiter on its effectiveness is that the points do fade. It would be very difficult, for instance, this 2d6 attack to get up to its maximum, because the points fade at 5 point character points per turn. So, as it's written, it's almost certainly impossible for you to ever get up to the maximum points absorbed, because at the end of every turn, you're dropping by 5 that were absorbed. It's Yeah, this is the other reason you may not want to allow this power. It's a headache to keep track of. All right, so that's absorption. Damage reduction. Damage reduction is a defensive power. Uh, Basically, any damage that gets through PD and ED, let's just define it. Only part of the damage which gets through his defenses is applied to stun and body. There are 2 types of hit points in champions or hero: stun. When you run out of stun, you're knocked unconscious. And body. When you run out of body, you're dead. So that's the easiest way to think about it. So, bottom line, you have some physical defense and some energy defense, some PD and ED. You subtract those from incoming damage, and then this damage reduction reduces that by a certain percentage point: 25%, 50%, or 75%. So this can really mount up. If, bottom line, your player should have this or high PD and ED, not both. Is why the yield sign is out there. Watch this, because let's say the character in question has 20 PD and has physical damage reduction resistant 75%. Okay, so you fire off an attack at them that does 40 points of stun damage. Well, they take their 20 off, so it's now 20, and then now they reduce that by 75%, so they take 5. So you gave them a pretty good hit, and they're taking 5 stun. That's probably more than what you want. So this is why you should have an active point total on defenses that you allow or don't allow as a GM. Say 40 points of defenses. That does not mean 40 PD or 40 ED. That means if you have 40 PD or 40 ED, you've got all you can have against physical or energy attacks. Okay? You can't put on any damage reduction on top of that. This is the best way to keep this power from becoming a yield sign, from becoming something you didn't really want. Characters with high PD and high ED and damage reduction, bottom line, are nigh unstoppable. They simply cannot be hurt. Yes, Wonder Goon is correct. This is a wonderful power for a villain that is designed, a singular villain who's designed to fight a full superhero groups. Not really good for PCs, in his opinion. I'm tending to agree. I can see a few types of PCs that should be allowed, like a Rubber Man, but their defenses, their actual PD and ED, should be comparably low in face of the fact that they have damage reduction. So that's the thing to keep in mind. Again, a big bad supervillain, a boss level supervillain, may have high levels of PD and ED and damage reduction, but they're taking on by themselves a whole team. So probably stands to reason that they're able to shrudge off so much. Duplication. We'll move on along, because I think enough's been said about damage reduction. Duplication is one to watch simply because this allows the person to assign, say, 300 points, and now for 60 active points, they can throw out a duplicate, another 300-point character, onto the playing field. If you go by my 90 active point rule limit, then they could get up to throwing out up to 64 of these 300-point duplicate characters and still stay within the limits, within what's legal. No. No, 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 no. Wondergoon has an excellent saying that he says, no armies need apply. Basically, you're part of a team already. Why did you join a team when you are a team? So, no. I agree with him 100%. Duplication is a power that really should have a stop sign out. I will only very rarely allow Marvel's Multiple Man in my games, and actually, no, I just won't allow him. So, it's a perfectly justifiable power from the standpoint of the source material. But to be perfectly blunt and perfectly honest, it is completely outstrips the number of points paid for it. So no, don't come knocking with that. It's not going to work. Actually, I will say there are some exceptions. If you have minions who aren't really minions, they're not really followers. They're just little 50-point normal people that are doing various jobs around your base that are your duplicates. I would allow something like that. Might. But I'd want to see it. And I guess that's really the point of the yield sign, but that's also the point of the stop signs. I really do feel duplication deserves a stop sign. Basically, you're an army of one. All right? So that brings up Find Weakness. Find Weakness is another power that probably should have a stop sign. Let's come back to our Energy Blast power over here, because I want to do a comparison for it. Let's take off Explosion and Auto Fire and put on Armor Piercing. Armor Piercing is a plus 1/2 advantage. What it does is it halves the target's appropriate defense. So in the case of this EB, which is versus energy defense, it would halve the target's energy defense, their ED, that they were using to defend against the damage. Okay. So what if I put it on more than once? Because I can do that. It still only halves the defense. It doesn't cut it into a quarter. It still is only half. Okay? What the multiple levels of armor piercing do is they counter the defense against armor piercing, which is hardened. Hardened is an advantage that can be put onto defenses that negates armor piercing. So you can double armor pierce your attack, and that will negate one level of hardening. But as you can see, they can put on more than one level. Let's put it on there. They can put on more than one level of hardening. So you can get into kind of a war of escalation here. But in the end, multiple levels of armor piercing are only there to cancel out the defense of hardening your armor. So what does that have to do with Find Weakness? Well, Find Weakness, let's say all attacks, gives you an 11 or less roll to find a weakness with any attack you can use, and it halves the PD or ED of the target. Well, I'm going to roll again. Well, you're -2 now, but if you succeed in that roll, their defenses of that type are now at 1/4. Okay? Or you can switch and you can half their other type of defense. Okay? But you're still at the -2 on the roll. Okay? Each time you use Find Weakness against the same target, you are at -2 on the next roll, but you can target others of their defenses. But the point is that it is actually in ways better than armor piercing because you can cut their defenses to half, and then a quarter, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, and so forth. Okay? So it very readily can become a holy crap. Now, granted, to be able to use Find Weakness with all of your attacks is going to be base 30 points right up front. And for each +1 to that 11 or less roll on 3 die 6 costs 5 points. So keep that in mind. It's a pretty expensive power to have, but its potential effects, GMs, is significant. So it is definitely deserving of that yield sign out beside it. Missile deflection. I kind of think enough is said there. Missile deflection is exactly what it says. It's that you're able to deflect an incoming attack. There are certain attacks that cannot be deflected, like an area effect attack. Wondergoon, Find Weakness is an almost immediate no from him as a GM unless you wow me with an explanation as to why you have it. I have to agree with him. Going back to Find Weakness. Wow me. I will allow it, but wow me. Why do you have it? And I know I'm not going to give a good example here. That's for you to figure out. This is about using our imaginations, right? When I can't come up with good examples like transdimensional, I'm going to say that. But come up with some good reasons you think why Find Weakness should be there. But missile deflection, the reason it's got a yield sign out beside it is because there is a level of it. Where it can be any ranged attack, 20 points. And then you can add on missile reflection, where you can bounce it back, deflect it back at the attacker. Which, if they don't have personal immunity on their attack as a +1/4 advantage, they take damage from their own attack. And then you can reflect it at any target. So now you can use their attack as your attack, essentially. So that's why it's got a yield sign out beside it. Captain America is a good example character of someone who has missile deflection, and in some versions, missile reflection, because he's able to bounce that incoming attack off at anybody he wants to. Certain martial artists are very good at this sort of thing, too. Wonder Woman with her bracelets. Although Wonder Woman, there's a funny little cartoon, because why does she really need to do that when she's pretty much bulletproof all over? And there's a nice little cartoon out there why she does it. So that's all the yield sign powers. Pretty short list. Cool. And to be perfectly honest, let's go on for a little bit. So let's delete the Find Weakness. Let's go back to our Energy Blast. Let's take off our armor piercing. Call up our modifier list. And let's look at these yield sign advantages. I'll start going through them. I'm probably going to call this a day in here in a minute. This stream finished. I'm also noticing that there have been a few frame drops. Attack versus limited defense. This is one that gets a lot of confusion, because this makes it sound like AVLD, as it's often called, makes it sound like, I get to set what type of defense it's against. Well, you do. Thank you, Wondergoon. You do, but only within a certain range. A power with attack versus limited defense, AVLD, is affected by only limited or unusual defenses. So it becomes, AVLD means instead of PD or ED, The target defense is something like flash defense or knockback resistance or mental defense or power defense or something like that. That's what AVLD is about. And to be perfectly honest, you're going to have to give me a good reason why your energy blast should be AVLD. You're going to have to come up with a pretty good reason. That said, a power that is AVLD typically only does stun damage. So it's a useless advantage to put on a killing attack, for one. But on a normal attack, it's stun only at AVLD. Now, you can add on the advantage, does body, but it's a +1 advantage, and as you can see, it has a stop sign. Basically, it's attacking against a defense that most people aren't going to have, so you're basically making an attack that hits and does damage, period. And that's not a good thing. As a GM, you should watch out for that. So if they do convince you that it should be AVLD, you should definitely watch if they turn around and then want it to be able to do body as well. Okay? And that's why it's got a yield sign and then a stop sign out behind it. Okay? So taking that off and calling back up our modifiers. Indirect. This is the ability to put on a power the ability to come from up to any direction. You can have it where it always fires away from for +1/4, it always fires away from the wielder from a predetermined point. This is good because you might want this on a power because it allows you to bypass a barrier. If they throw up a force wall, you can step close enough that your point of fire is inside their force wall, and bam. Force wall is different from force field, by the way. So you can bypass defenses with indirect. You can call lightning from the sky. Okay, so it always comes from the same direction, but can come from anywhere. Bam. So indirect is something you should probably watch. In the end, it's not terribly unbalancing, but it's something, why do you want your attack to be indirect? And keep in mind that it will bypass some types of defense very easily. So keep that in mind. Line of sight. Line of sight, most attack powers like Energy Blast are ranged and therefore suffer range penalties if your target is over a certain distance away. Okay? Line of sight means that if you see them, you can hit them with no penalty due to range. I see them. If they're in range, you hit them, or you can hit them with no penalty due to that range. So line of sight can be unbalancing sometimes. Sometimes, some games, you may just want it as a standard, as a default. You don't want to keep track of range penalties? Okay. But it's something to keep in mind, something to be aware of. Okay? So there we have. Then comes another somewhat misunderstood yield sign advantage. Penetrating, like armor piercing, is defeated by hardening. If the target has hardened PD or ED, and your penetrating attack goes against it, the hardening undoes the penetrating. Okay, but you can buy multiple levels of penetrating to counter hardened, and you get into an arms race. Penetrating, what it does is this is an attack that will always do some damage. Okay, so on an energy blast like this, a penetrating energy blast will always do at least, in this case, 4 stun. The number of dice thrown in the attack, it will do at least that much of its primary damage type. With energy blast, that's stun. So a penetrating 8d6 penetrating energy blast will do a minimum of 8 stun unless Um, um, they have hardening on their defense, hardened on their defense. Okay, if it's all penetrating killing attack, then it will always do. It's like it was a 4 die 6 ranged killing attack. Then that attack is always going to do a minimum of 4 body damage unless their defenses are hardened. And that's why penetrating has a yield sign out beside it. This is an attack that is always going to do at least some of its major type of damage. By the way, killing attacks, the total of the dice is the body damage done. Energy blast and normal attacks, the total of the dice is the amount of stun damage done. So that's why I said penetrating just means it's going to do some of the major type of damage that it does. Okay? In and of itself, not that bad a deal until you get into killing attacks. Penetrating killing attacks are just downright nasty. There's no two ways about it. It's something, number one, a killing attack should probably be something only a villain has. But a penetrating killing attack should be something you're actually trying to put one of your heroes into a hospital, one or more of your heroes into a hospital, if not outright kill them. Okay. Okay. So, um, that's why penetrating has a yield sign out beside it. It's got the potential to really do something serious. Penetrating drain, for instance. Most characters don't have power defense, which is the defense against the drain power. Drain siphons off some of the character points you have in a power, lowering its effectiveness. And so penetrating, already you're hitting them with an attack that very few have uh, the defense, but now you're making it where even people who have the defense are still going to be affected by your drain. That might not be the best of things to do. Of course, again, drains are oftentimes really more or less all or nothing anyway. So that's those advantages. Let's take a look at some of these unavailable advantages. Why does cumulative have a yield sign? Cumulative means that the roll can stack up till you get to the desired level effect. Cumulative would be something you would put on something like, say, a mind control. I made a character a villain up one time with a 1 die 6 mind control, but it was cumulative. And so he could choose what he wanted you to do and keep rolling his 1 die 6 mind control, paying the endurance for it the whole time, mind you, until he reached the level of effect necessary to get you whatever it was he wanted you to do. Now, in this case, the power only affected normal people. It didn't affect you. But I called this guy the worm because he wormed his way into your brain no matter what. Okay, so cumulative is probably something, if it does pop up as an available advantage, that you want to watch. Does body, we've mentioned that. There's a reason it's a stop sign. You probably already got, yeah, dang internet, jeez. My drop frames are really going crazy now. There are some attacks that only do stun damage. Does body puts it back to where they do their body damage potential is back. That's probably a bad idea. An example is Ego Blast. Most people don't have mental defense to defend against an ego attack in the first place. So to have does body on that is making a killing power. Point blank. Inherent. That one didn't pop up before. Inherent is an advantage that you put on something. Like if your character is an alien who has armored plates that bony plates that grow out of his skin and offer protection, any PD or ED he has from that is inherent. That means it cannot be dispelled drained, or suppressed. It is part of you. It's like flight for a bird or for a flighted bird. The only way you can take it apart, is to remove their focus of their wings. You can't drain it, you can't suppress it. You have to remove it from their body or bind them in some way. That's what Inherent does. And so that gets us through even the unusable ones. And I'm going to call it a night there, or a stream there. We will get into the yield sign limitations, of which there are a few. And that is the whole list. So actually, let's go ahead and do them real quick. Okay. There is fuel dependent. I'm not really familiar with that one, so let's bring up its definition. Signals to use some sort of fuel which is used up and must periodically replenish. So let's add that to the power, and you can sit there and do the fuel must be replaced once per minute, or 5 minutes, or 20 minutes, 6 hours. Fuel is difficult to obtain. So this would be something that you'd probably put on something like a flight power or something to that effect. And at the same time, you would probably not put once per minute. A jet would probably need to be refueled every 6 hours or so. And if it's a starship that requires some special radioactive isotope to fuel, you'd click on that and get more of a limitation for it. But there's a yield sign out beside it because, it's not going to be drawing. It can unbalance how you want to run your game. Do you really want your starship to be having to be refueled and have that as be the center and the scourge of the adventure? Or do you want them to have to go out and do the adventure? No conscious control. This is probably a power that you as the GM should just veto unless you really want to keep track of it, because in the end, you have to keep track of it. A no conscious control power operates when the GM says it operates. It is not under the control of the player. Okay? Fuel dependent is a great limitation for vehicles, and that's probably about it. But no conscious control. No conscious control. It works when the GM says it works. The player can sit there and say, I'm going to try to use my power X. But if the GM, in his or her infinite wisdom, decides it's not going to work, it's not going to work. If nothing else, this could lead to a lot of hurt feelings around the table. But considering it's a -2 limitation, the bottom line is it usually just shouldn't work, especially not when the player asks for it. The GM could at any time say, you know what, your power X just worked. It just went off. So that's why the yield sign is there. You may lose some friends at the table because you're always saying, no, it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. Hey, you know what? It worked. All right. But a -2 limitation means it's cutting the cost of the power by 1/3. So if it normally has 60 active points, it's now down to 20 real points that they have to spend. So it's a pretty stout limitation, and you just should keep that in mind. Wondergoon, I had a player with no conscious control on a power. I will not allow it for anyone else. There we have it. You run the risk of losing friends with that limit by allowing that limitation, because most players simply don't understand. They don't want to understand what it means. All right? They really don't. They really think that means you as the GM are going to give them some bonus points for them, but pretty much let them use the power whenever they want anyway. And that should not be the case. All right? Then there's variable limitations. This is kind of like variable advantage, except I can shift the limitations around. The problem there is that some of these limitations aren't really appropriate for them to be shifted around. But again, what this is really for is to allow one power to represent a suite of very similar powers. Um, so it could be something like beam um, on one phase, one action, and then extra time on the next one. But where it comes into problems is where if they try to make charges be the limitation on one phase. Well, if they change it on the next phase out of charges really wasn't much of a limitation now, was it? So it's something that you definitely should watch out for and keep an eye on and basically say no to some of the switches of the limitations that they do. And I think that's signed limitations. I will add discussion on one more that causes a lot of problems, and that is this one, independent. It's another -2 limitation. But basically, independent is now independent of the character. That means it doesn't belong to that character. It's not the only association with that character that it has is that it is currently being used by the character. An independent power, crap. Yeah, I'm starting to cut out a lot of drop frames. I will go over independent on another day. Things are kind of getting crazy here anyway. So I hope you've tuned in and enjoyed. I see we now have 2 viewers. I'm having some trouble with my internet. I thought those problems were solved today. They obviously aren't. So I'm going to call it a night. I've covered quite a bit of material anyway. So with that in mind, let's make that done. Let's cancel that. And let's call it a night. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for tuning in and watching. I will have this up on YouTube as well as on Twitch for you to go back and watch it, any parts you may have missed that you're interested in. But other than that, we're going to call it a night. So be well, good evening, and we'll see you again next time.